today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Later on this month, on the 18th, unbeaten up-and-comer from Canada, Howling is going to be returning to action in what will be her first fight of this year. She was in action late last year in November.
Just a few months later, she's set to return to action. Good that she's keeping a regular schedule of activity.
She'll be facing journeywoman Liliana Borquez in what is being billed as a six-rounder in the women's super bantamweight division. Super bantamweight, that's where Mayerling Rivas reigns as that division's WBA champion. Yamileth Mercado, she's got the WBC. Deborah Dionysius of Argentina, she's got the WBO. Sherniqua Johnson, she's got the IBF.
It's a good time. Very good time to campaign in the women's super bantamweight division, unlike some other divisions north of super bantamweight, because there are a lot more opportunities.
For a young fighter who ain't got that many fights, not yet, not quite ready for an Amanda Serrano or an Alicia Baumgartner, a Katie Taylor.
A young fighter like a Howling.
A young fighter like a Howling that shows real promise, real ability, but still needs to get more rounds in the bank, still needs to garner more professional experience. The super bantamweight division would be ideal.
And that's where she's going to be fighting.
Sporting a professional record of 4 wins, no losses, no draws, no recorded knockouts, not yet. Howling has the look of a more experienced fighter than she actually is, at least in a boxing ring. It's my understanding that she crossed over from Muay Thai over into professional boxing, and she's very young. She's only 25 years old.
Many good years ahead of her.
And that adequately explains why Bree, in spite of not having that many professional fights and not having that many rounds in the bank, she still retains the look of a more maturated and experienced fighter than her record would lead you to believe.
She does come from a combat background.
Having debuted as a professional in 2019, in September of 2019, Bree's only got 4 pro fights.
She fought once in 2019, once in 2020, once in 2021.
Then once in 2022. I would like to see Bree Howling fight more than once this year, because ideally with an unbeaten up-and-comer like a Bree Howling, you want the fighter banking as many rounds.
In the early stages of their career, you want the fighter fighting often.
She's going to be facing Liliana Borquez, who's coming right off a unanimous decision loss to Carolyn Veer in what was Carolyn's professional debut.
This is a developmental fight.
Bring along fight. A necessary evil, especially for Bree Howling, who's campaigning in a talent-rich, densely populated division. You got to remember, this is the same division where both Ramla Ali and Ellie Scottney,
Crawford,
Nazarena Romero. This is the division where those talented, unbeaten up-and-comers campaign.
Bree Howling's got to keep up with the Joneses. The saving grace and the silver lining for her is that she's pretty fucking talented herself.
Moves well, shows the jab, places her punches well, measures the distance well, and she's defensible. She doesn't overcommit to her punches.
Shows a good variety of them.
Good shot selection, head punches, body punches.
At only 4-0, she's a balanced fighter, a well-balanced fighter.
All I really need to do is get her on a more regular schedule of activity, and she will appear that much sharper, that much more put together over time.
She's already got a solid base.
You get her on a more regular schedule of activity, and that will add momentum and sharpness. Wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. Bree Howling is a good fighter and a potential champion. Good dimensions, good physical dimensions for these weights. Bantamweight, super bantamweight.
This fighter could go all the way.
Even though she hasn't had the chance to be particularly active in a given calendar year, she has assisted in the preparation of fighters like Steffi Cohen and current reigning undisputed super featherweight champion Alicia Baumgartner.
He's a good fighter.
She'll be in action in a little over a week's time, attempting to advance to a professional record of 5-0. I anticipate that Bree Howling, at minimum, she can and will win a points decision. And here's hoping that we see a more active Bree Howling this year in 2023. In men's welterweight news, unified welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr. late yesterday posted this GIF, what appears to be a man spinning the block.
What I think is supposed to herald Errol Spence Jr.'s renewed interest in doing the Terence Crawford fight.
If this is Errol proverbially spinning the block, he certainly took a long time to do it. It's not a secret that an order has already come down from the WBO for Terence Crawford to satisfy his next mandatory challenger in Alexis Rocha. The result of the process of elimination in the WBO's ranked standings, Virgil, who was once ranked at number 1,
refused to fight him twice. I don't know why.
Ortiz.
Billy Ortiz, excuse me. Billy Ortiz refused him to fight. Billy was my friend.
Just to confirm, you're saying Virgil Ortiz refused to fight Crawford 2 times?
Yeah, we offered the fight twice here.
is preoccupied with a Montestanionis.
Jaron Ennis, who was more interested in becoming the IBF's interim champion than the WBO's.
Becoming interim champion by way of another sanctioning body has resulted in him being removed from the WBO's rank standings. And Keith Thurman, he was ranked at number 3, but Keith, last I checked, was supposed to be fighting Errol.
The next man in line was Alexis Rocha, so here we are.
As stated, if this is Errol proverbially spinning the block, he certainly took a long time to do it.
The David Avanesian fight took place in December of last year on the 10th.
So you had all of what remained of December, which was approximately 3 weeks, all of January.
All of it to spin the block.
All of it to resume negotiations with Terence Crawford for what's supposed to be the undisputed title fight between yous. You had all of January, most of February, and you wait good up until an order comes down. It already comes down from the WBO. Reports indicate they're already in negotiations and they have little more than 19 to 20 days to get a deal done.
18 days now.
Needless to say, Errol's timing is impeccable. It seems to me like he waited for the most inopportune time to quote-unquote spin the block, though let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is little more than just a GIF. We don't actually know that Errol is in the process of revisiting those negotiations with Terence Crawford behind the scenes. For all we know, this is little more than just a smear campaign.
You might post this by way of your social media so that all of your followers see it in order to give them the impression that you're spinning the block.
And if you are spinning the block, what the hell took you so long? Because you had most of December and January.
Most of February, too. That order from the WBO didn't come down till late last month.
What was it, the last 2 days? Last 2-3 days? You decide you want to spin the block at the beginning of March.
Give me a break.
And naturally, Errol Spence Jr. supporters are going to go along with this and run with it because they don't have much else to run with. The last we heard, Errol was still en route to face Keith Thurman at 154 pounds.
That entire bizarre conversation. The WBC orders this guy to satisfy his mandatory challenger in Keith Thurman for what is his WBC welterweight title.
It's supposed to be a welterweight title defense. Welterweight, right?
Right.
So why did preliminary reports indicate that the fight wouldn't take place at welterweight, that it would take place at super welterweight, otherwise known as junior middleweight? Doesn't that essentially mean that the WBC is set to allow him to blow the weight? They're going to let him hang on to his title and let him blow the weight at the same time.
It's ridiculous.
This tired dog and pony show.
I mean, I don't really know what the hell this is, what it heralds, how to interpret it. Is this just Errol Spence Jr. once again dangling that carrot in front of his fans, getting their hopes up just to disappoint them?
The most I can take away from it is that if this does in fact herald Errol spinning the block, quote unquote, for a Terence Crawford fight, he took his sweet time. He waited up until the most inopportune time when Terence is in the thick of negotiations.
When he's under orders.
When he's in talks for another fight with another fighter on the premise that you were supposed to be facing Keith Thurman. I mean, what is the situation over there?
And those who might fault Terence Crawford for entering negotiations with another fighter, well, Terence, like Errol, is under orders. It's not like Terence had much of a choice.
If your justification for Errol not revisiting Terence Crawford talks sooner is because he was under orders by way of the WBC, Terence is now under orders by way of the WBO.
This ain't a voluntary title defense we're talking about here. What the hell was he supposed to do? Just stand by the phone and wait for Errol to give him a call?
It's been well over a month since his last fight. Approximately 2, a little over 2, and Errol's waiting up until now.
It's almost like you waited up until the most inopportune time to quote-unquote spin the block, if that's what you're even doing.
But he was sick and tired of not being able to say anything. His legal team said, no, do this, we've got this report, we've got this law case. He's like, no, fuck it, now everyone thinks that I've made up something about eggs. I'm not having it. I'm telling you what happened. And there's loads more to come. But he's had enough. And now I was like, I wish really we could just draw a line under it and move on. But he doesn't. He's on one. Because he had the chance again from that WBC statement to go, oh, I'm in the clear now. Let's just crack on. He doesn't want to. He wants to speak to everybody and tell everybody what's happened here on these various different situations. And none of it makes sense.
It doesn't make sense because there are pieces missing. It doesn't make sense because of what the implications are based on the research.
Mm-hmm.
The independent research that Conor Benn employed in order to clear his name. His experts, how In the 270-page document submitted to the WBC, at no point did Connor Benn indicate that contaminated eggs caused the failed VADA test. The WBC concluded that.
But he's the one getting the heat for it.
I can recall when all of this started from the very beginning. Connor Benn seemed to have indicated that if there was an error, it was on VADA's end.
We talked about it here on the channel when this news first broke.
The report by Connor Benn's legal team concluded that there were clear irregularities and flaws with testing procedures. First sample came back clear 3 times. Only when it was retested 9 days later did the test show a trace positive result. For your information, tests are only supposed to be run once, and the lab could lose its accreditation for such misconduct.
I don't think people realize the implications of what Connor Benn is saying.
Likely because they couldn't be bothered to read through his entire statement. Given the length of the statement, it was a lengthy read, and I gather that if people haven't fully wrapped their minds around this, it's because they haven't read through it and thought about it.
It's easier to just take cheap shots.
Given the sheer number of professional boxers that test positive for a banned substance, to the casual observer, the untrained eye, this will seem like just another instance among many instances of a professional boxer testing positive for a banned substance and subsequently having a lofty explanation.
They don't want to hear it.
What stands out is that Connor Benn isn't going with the WBC's explanation. In fact, Connor Benn's story has been more or less consistent from the very beginning. It seemed to me that he was laying the blame at the feet of the lab techs that conducted the tests from the get-go.
And he still is.
Tested positive for traces of clomiphene due to a large consumption of eggs. They requested Connor Benn's diet nutritional plan from his nutritionist. He sent it to them. In the document, in the 270 pages, there is no mention of eggs from Connor Benn. So please don't, eggs, yeah, nice one, Connor. No, that is what the WBC have found from the scientific report in relation to the levels in the testing versus the other tests that were around it, that they believe it was contaminated, most likely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that's not his defense.
It isn't. The conclusion that Connor Benn's independent research came to is different than the conclusion that the WBC's research came to. His independent research seems to point in the direction of breaking protocol and laboratory errors.
Troubling ones that could see the lab that handled these samples losing their accreditation, their ability to run these kinds of tests.
But the lab that handled his samples ran tests on his sample 4 times where they were only supposed to do it once. Questions that need answers.
Why did they break protocol? What was the reasoning behind that?
How, contrary to popular opinion, Benn requested that his B sample be tested at the earliest opportunity. Fighters are legally allowed an independent scientist present, a witness.
That's what the independent scientist is acting as, a witness to ensure that when the B sample is opened, it's not tampered with.
Nobody puts anything in there. And according to Connor Benn, Benn's scientist was not allowed in the room.
Why not? What the hell were you guys doing in there?
These protocols, the breach of them, is more egregious than perhaps people realize. You know, you could have put anything in this kid's samples.
I mean, that's why these protocols are in place. You're allowed an independent scientist to be present when the B sample is open to ensure nobody puts anything in there. And if what Connor Benn says is true, and his independent scientist wasn't allowed in the room,
that's the implication, the potential implication. That leaves the door open for someone to tamper with those samples.
because the witness isn't present.
Clomiphene is a substance that's said to stay in your system for months on end, and yet Benn passed his UCAD test barely a week after failing his VADA test.
If there was in fact clomiphene in Connor Benn's system at the time those samples were taken by VADA, why didn't that clomiphene show up in the UCAD test which was conducted afterwards?
If there was in fact clomiphene in Connor Benn's system, it should have. It should have showed up in the UCAD tests as well. And it didn't. All of his UCAD tests came back clean.
Make it make sense.
Why is VADA reporting an adverse finding and UCAD isn't? What's going on over there at VADA?
What's going on at the lab where these tests were run, where these samples were held, where these protocols were broken?
And why were they broken? Why did you run those tests? 4 times. Why didn't you allow Connor Benn's independent scientists to bear witness to the B sample's opening?
And why are your tests reporting an adverse finding, but you CADs aren't?
These questions need answers.
Why did it take such a long period from the adverse findings until January to begin to analyse everything?
I don't want to be incorrect to you. The statement is there. The statement is clear. I cannot discuss further. The ruling is clear. It's all there. And I don't want to be rude. I always answer every single question. But why or what, it's not on our side. So what we put there, it's very clearly explained. I hope that you understand. As I said, the matter is closed. I will not comment anymore on the matter. The WBC has put the ruling publicly, and that's all that I have to say.
Why is Mauricio so tight-lipped about all of this? Could it be because Connor Benn's independent research points the finger, points the blame in the direction
of VADA and the lab, whatever lab handled these samples?
His samples and the protocols that they breached. The lofty explanation about contaminated eggs, who did that come from? That came from the WBC, and they're experts, not Connor.
Connor's story, his explanation is...
He's blaming the lab that handled his samples. So then what you have to wonder is, why were these protocols breached?
Why wasn't Connor Benn's independent scientist, his independent witness, why were they not allowed in the room?
Why did you run tests on a sample 4 times where you were only supposed to do it once? What the hell do you guys have going on over there?
See, what you have to start to ask yourself is the reason that Connor Benn, the reason he's so persistent is because he feels that he's being set up.
He's not going with the WBC's lofty explanation. He doesn't want to let it go. He's sticking to his guns, and is he doing that because he feels he's being set up?